In Mexico City, during excavation work in 1978 near the cathedral, a heavy slab was unearthed, decorated with magnificent bas-reliefs that someone a very long time ago had smashed and buried. Researchers wondered who could have smashed this beautiful work of art, and why. To find these answers, we have to go back in time to the year 1519, when Mexico City, one of the world's largest and most populated cities, did not yet exist. In its place was an extraordinary and incredible city, Tenochtitlan. This was the capital and the heart of the grandiose Aztec Empire. The monarch, who had the power of life and death over his subjects, was Montezuma II, descendant of another Montezuma, the great leader who founded the empire and built the grand monuments at Tenochtitlan. Like his ancestor, Montezuma was a highly religious sovereign, particularly devoted to the god Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, to whom hundreds of temples were dedicated. Quetzalcoatl was an extremely benevolent god, the only god in the Aztec pantheon opposed to human sacrifices. The sacred texts state that the god had left the land promising that he would return to redeem his people. And according to the Aztec calendar, the year 1519, by our current calendar, ended one of the sacred cycles. This meant that Quetzalcoatl would soon return, and that's what Montezuma thought when he heard of the floating mountain on the sea. But in 1519, it was not a god that arrived, but conquistador Hernán Cortés. And the floating mountain was a Spanish galleon full of soldiers and weapons. Thinking he was a god, the Aztecs received Cortés with honors and adulation. In return, Cortés went on to destroy the Aztec capital and exterminate its population. Montezuma died, and his successor, Teotihuacan, was forced to surrender. But how was such a rout possible? The invaders wielded devastating weapons and equipment completely unknown to the indigenous population: cannons, rifles, pistols, and horses, which proved to be formidable war machines. The conquistadors inadvertently brought another devastating weapon, a viral disease, smallpox. Smallpox found virgin territory in the New World. Millions died, over 2/3 of the Aztec population. Among them, the last king, Cuauhtémoc, whose death marked the end of the great ancient civilization of the Aztecs. Maybe if there were no disease, the Aztec soldiers might have fared better against the invaders. They were considered noble warriors and often used predators like eagles as their symbols of strength. These 6-foot statues, now in the National Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City, depict how they would have looked. The statues once guarded the gates to a temple called, appropriately, Temple of the Warriors. Tenochtitlan was a grand city that stood in the middle of a large lake on a plateau surrounded by mountains. The first inhabitants of the area were tenacious souls who did not shy away from hardship. They transformed their settlement into one of the most extensive and populous metropolises of the then-known world. Their projects included dams, canals, and the draining of swamps. When the soldiers would come back from victorious battles with their spoils of war, they would visit the big market of Tlatelolco. Here they might try to bargain for some precious fabric or rare bird feathers to enrich their attire. Tlatelolco stood at the present site of Mexico City's Plaza de la Tres Culturas. Remains of the ancient Aztec market are still found here, along with traces of a more recent past. Archaeologists have unearthed a main pyramid, rebuilt 14 times, along with other pyramids, platforms, stairs, and altars. In the middle of the plaza stands the Baroque church of Santiago de Tlatelolco, and not far off, the modern-day Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Unfortunately, to build this skyscraper and the adjacent road, the Pyramid of Quetzalcoatl and a minor temple dedicated to his worship were sacrificed. Tlatelolco probably wasn't much different from a modern Mexican market. The faces, the voices, the smells, and the many colors of the fruits, vegetables, spices, meats, and other goods for sale are probably the same. Europeans owe the richness of their cuisine to the peoples of America. Until they discovered the New World, they knew nothing of potatoes, tomatoes, corn, peppers, or eggplant. At Tlatelolco, fabrics, skins, pottery, and other commonly used objects were displayed and traded by Aztec merchants called Pochtecans. They would hawk their goods not for currency like gold coins, but in trade for precious cocoa beans. The market was the commercial heart of their world, but it was also the unfortunate theater for the last desperate resistance by the Aztecs during the siege of their capital in the year 1521. After the Spaniards conquered the area, they started building structures of their own, like the Cathedral of Mexico City. But instead of quarrying for new stones, they used stones from an Aztec temple dedicated to the god Huitzilopochtli. Construction of the cathedral was begun in 1573, but 250 years would pass before it was finished, ending up as a mix of very different styles. In spite of great efforts to consolidate its foundations, the cathedral is now unavoidably sinking into the swampy ground, an ironic end to a monument erected by the conquistadors to erase all traces of the glorious Tenochtitlan. Until the year 1978, it appeared as though the invaders had succeeded in their malicious intent. But then something completely unexpected happened. During excavation work for the Mexico City subway, workers digging a trench near the cathedral stumbled upon pieces of a gigantic and mysterious oval stone with a diameter of over 7 feet and a weight of nearly 9 tons. The stone was immediately identified as an Aztec relic and was truly an extraordinary find, inaugurating a new era for modern Mexican archaeology. The earth would soon yield the ancient vestiges of Tenochtitlan, an exceptional discovery comparable to that of the city of Troy. The archaeologist in charge of the work couldn't have had a more apt name: Eduardo Matos Montezuma. He decided to demolish a whole block of the modern city and give back to Mexicans the heart of their ancient capital. From the many relics that have now been discovered, scientists are able to imagine how the magnificent ancient capital might have looked. The center of Tenochtitlan, situated between the cathedral and the Palacio Nacional on the Grand Plaza of the Zocalo, was mainly a place of worship, full of temples erected on the tops of pyramids with their characteristic steep stairways and colorful wall paintings. The city, at an elevation of over 6,500 feet, was surrounded by the lake, hills, and mountains. It was connected to the mainland by many causeways and interlaced with navigable canals. It was a great metropolis with over 1,200,000 inhabitants. The ceremonial center, Teotihuacan, had many temples dedicated to important gods. The most imposing was the Templo Mayor, the religious heart of Tenochtitlan, the destination for pilgrims and home for priests and divinities. Only priests were allowed to climb to the top of the pyramid and enter the two temples. On either side of the temple, there were two other sacred constructions dedicated to the gods Quetzalcoatl and Tezcatlipoca. Teotihuacan also had dwellings reserved for those in the priesthood and playing fields for an Aztec ball game, which had more of a spiritual meaning than a sporting one. The players were the priests themselves. And lastly, there was the famous Altar of the Skulls, the Tzompantli, where the craniums of human sacrifice victims were displayed. For the Aztecs, religious rites and sacrifices were a necessity, the only way to earn the benevolence of the gods. They believed they were warding off famine, natural disasters, and defeats in battle. And the greatest sacrifice they could make was a human one. The priests made them lie on their backs on narrow sacrificial stones, then cut open their chests and pulled out pulsating hearts as an offering to the idols before them. This description by a Spaniard illustrates one of these sacrifices, made in honor of Huitzilopochtli, the god of the sun and war. There were quite a lot of Aztec gods that demanded human sacrifices. Tlaloc, the god of rain. Coatlicue, the earth goddess, depicted as an old masked woman wearing a narrow skirt tied at the waist with a belt of serpents. Xutecutli, god of fire. Mayahuel, goddess of inebriating beverages, especially the most popular at the time, pulque. The excavation work of ancient Tenochtitlan lasted 5 years and brought to light over 7,000 objects, including sculptures, small artifacts, votive offerings, and the skulls of sacrifice victims. Most of the relics are kept in the very modern Museo del Templo Mayor. The stone that sparked the excavation work is in the place of honor in the center of the museum. The disc is decorated with a bas-relief portraying the goddess Coyolosh Hauqui, she who paints her face with bells, the Aztec moon goddess. Her body appears dismembered on the sculpted surface. According to legend, she was killed and cut to pieces by her brother, the god of war, who held her responsible for having tried to kill their mother, Coatlicue, goddess of the earth. Another wonderful relic in the museum, and the only one of its kind, is this terracotta statue of the Bat God, a divinity of the underworld for worship of the dead. There are also many masks portraying the deceased and mythological beings. The Aztec people were filled with supernatural and mythological tales. Elders spoke of a magical and rich city with splendid palaces that existed right here on Earth. The city was called Teotihuacan, the place where men became gods. These pyramids and ruins are what remains of this once majestic city. In the 4th and 5th centuries, the 6th largest city in the world. When the Aztecs lived, the place was abandoned, partially swallowed up by the jungle. But the Aztecs still believed that the incredible pyramids were built by the gods thousands of years earlier, and they made pilgrimages to the site. Archaeologists found that the city of Teotihuacan was established in 200 BC by the peoples of the Mexico Valley. The pyramids, some of the most extraordinary monuments in the Americas, were built around 200 AD. At its zenith, Teotihuacan had grown to cover an area of almost 8 square miles and had almost 200,000 inhabitants. The monumental complex lies in the high Anahuac Valley in a barren and arid landscape that heightens its magical and mysterious atmosphere. It now attracts numerous people who gather here regularly to celebrate the rite of the salute to the sun. The city is bisected by a grand avenue, 130 feet wide and over a mile long, that is called the Avenue of the Dead. To the east stands Tenochtitlan, a building complex rich in murals. The paintings depict Tenochtitlan, a paradise with abundant water, butterflies, and flowers. Tenochtitlan was the world that was governed by Tlaloc, the god of rain. At the end of the Avenue of the Dead is the Ciudadela, the citadel, at whose center stands the pyramid dedicated to the god Quetzalcoatl. It is one of the most important buildings in the area. Next to its base are statues carved out of limestone and painted with natural pigments that used to decorate the pyramid. They represent the feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl. Originally, they were painted in bright colors. The undulating bodies of the serpents emerged from the walls of the pyramids, and the god's head was wreathed in a crown of feathers. In 1986, the excavations of this Ciudadela yielded an exceptional find, a sepulchre with the skeletons of 18 priests killed during a sacrifice. Until then, it was believed that only prisoners, slaves, or enemies were sacrificed on the altars. Here was proof that the rite of sacrifice did not discriminate. The most imposing sight, however, is in the Plaza del Sol. Along with the ruins of an altar and several temples stands the Pyramid of the Sun. 230 feet tall, 740 feet long on each side of the base, it is almost as big as the Egyptian Pyramid of Cheops at Giza, one of the 7 wonders of the world. Thousands of tourists make the steep but memorable climb to the top, a perfect place to take in the majesty of the entire complex. Ancient civilizations believed that both the sun and the moon were created at this site. From here you can also see the other great pyramid of Teotihuacan, the Pyramid of the Moon. Smaller than the Sun Pyramid, it's 130 feet high with a square base measuring 460 feet on each side. Yet despite these structures that have seemed to last an eternity, no one has figured out why the city and the culture disappeared so suddenly. The end apparently came around 750 AD. Some archaeologists feel the city was destroyed and burned, and its inhabitants fled. But no one knows who was responsible for the massacre, or what became of the survivors. Other experts have linked the decline of Teotihuacan simply to a change in the climate, which may have caused the already dry area to become uninhabitable. But that would not explain the fires and the devastation. Thus, the mystery of the lost city of Teotihuacan, where men became gods, lives on. One of the most incredible finds in the history of Mexican archaeology is the Sunstone. Miraculously escaping the fury of the Spanish, it was found in 1790 in Mexico City and incorporated into the eastern facade of the cathedral. The fascinating symbols incised into this Aztec treasure placed it at the center of numerous religious events. The relic can now be seen at the National Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City, a museum that contains many testaments to the origins and the histories of the peoples who populated Central America over the course of the millennia. A beautifully sculpted monkey-shaped receptacle made of extremely fragile black obsidian, heads carved in volcanic rock with eyes and teeth made of mother of pearl and pupils of pyrite, terracotta pipes, musical instruments, and thousands of other objects from the great Aztec culture. But perhaps the most precious is the sunstone. Archaeologists studied the disk for years in an attempt to reveal the mystery of its symbols. Today, they think they have the answer. The sunstone is a calendar, actually a double calendar. The complicated symbols refer both to a division of time based on religious precepts, where the solar year is 260 days long, and to a non-religious one, which divides the year exactly into 365 days. Other symbols describe the life of the planet, breaking it down into 5 solar ages, the so-called cosmogonic suns, and date the creation of the world to the 13th of August, 3114 BC, and its end to the 22nd of December, 2012. There are different interpretations, and there are certainly many mysteries still hidden in the signs inscribed on the sunstone by wise hands. Perhaps time alone can give us the final answer. Mexico City today is one of the world's largest capitals, and unfortunately, one of the most polluted, with millions of vehicles. It is a city of contradictions, where skyscrapers crowd the center and miserable shanties form a belt in the vast outskirts. Much has been done to restore dignity to the Indios, the direct descendants of the Aztecs, but the wounds inflicted by a brutal conquest half a millennium ago are still visible everywhere you look. There is one area, however, in the south of the city, where one can still find solace in the ancient ways. Called Xochimelco, this part of the modern city still conserves characteristics of the ancient Tenochtitlan. It has canals that wind among the chinampas, the floating gardens that were obtained by draining the swampland, the same technique that allowed the Aztecs to create their capital. On Sundays, the zone becomes crowded with people having their meals on brightly colored boats, with mariachi bands playing music, singing of unrequited love, sad songs, just like this poem written over 500 years ago by an Aztec prince. Shall I thus pass away like the flowers that fade? Will there be nothing left of my name, nothing of my fame on earth? Let there at least be flowers. Let there at least be song. What can my heart do? Without purpose, we passed through this world. But they did have a purpose. The Aztec warriors and the rulers who gave their lives in defense of this great civilization may indeed have felt a desperation at the end. But there is something left of their fame on earth. And the flowers are here too. But they're made of stone, and they're called pyramids. And they have the sun to crown them for all eternity.